In this video, we're going to look at the Schedule C that you'll be filling out on your taxes as an artist. This is just general information. You should get specific help based on your individual situation. We're going over this mostly so that you'll know what you need to document. Please don't sue CSU. This beauty right here is the Schedule C, Profit or Loss from Business form. Let's look at the details that you'll need to have available. The top part of the form seems like it would be straightforward. You're going to list your name as the proprietor. You're going to describe the business name if that's separate from you as an individual, and give the business address. In box A, you're going to say what kind of profession you have. Box B shouldn't scare you. The IRS keeps track of different kinds of businesses with codes. You fill that in on section B. 711510 is the code for independent artists, writers, and performers. If that isn't the best description of your business, there's a big list of codes in the instructions. Most artists are going to use the cash accounting method found on line F. Cash accounting means that you're tracking your expenses and income on the day they happened, as opposed to using some sort of accrual or credit system. You're going to be the one who materially participated in the operation of this business, so you're likely to say yes on line G, as you're the one who's doing everything and paying for everything. Note that I and J go together. It would be pretty dumb to say that you made payments that require you to file Form 1099, and then on the next line say that even though you were supposed to, you didn't file them. You file 1099s when you pay someone $600 or more to do work for your business. Part 1 is the income section. Gross sales are going to be the amount of the retail price for the things that you sold. This is before things like the gallery commissions or any fees that you had to pay. Gross income here isn't limited to just things you sold. It could be payment for services, any kind of money that you made as an artist for which you didn't receive a W-2, whether you got a 1099 or not. If you got a W-2, that's because you were somebody's employee, and therefore you're not the owner of the business. Part 2 is where you list expenses. You can see there are lots of little sections. Line 8 is where you would list any expenses that you had for advertising. One of the reasons you're likely to want to work with a professional when you're doing this is that there's a certain art to where you would want to include expenses. Are the fees that you pay for your website advertising or some other business deduction? I'm simply going to say that you should save the receipts. We'll talk more about how to do car and truck mileage expenses when we get to the second side of the form. Commissions and fees will count as an expense on line 10. So if you sold a $10,000 artwork through a gallery and they only paid you $5,000, you still list $10,000 in the gross sales and then subtract the $5,000 commission here. Depreciation is a big confusing ball of mess. If you bought large durable equipment, keep those receipts and talk to a professional about how to deduct it or to depreciate it. The good news is that you can deduct those legal or professional services on line 17. Paying someone to do your taxes is a legitimate business expense. Travel and meals are accounted for on line 24. Again, when you're traveling, you're likely to be using the IRS's per diem charts. Deductible meals might include things like taking a curator out to lunch to talk about your art. See the current year's instructions for what kinds of meals are deductible. There are few parts of the tax code that Congress enjoys changing more than what part, what kind, and what percentage of meals are deductible. Part 3 is at the top of page 2, and this is where you're going to calculate the cost of the goods that you sold. One thing that gets complicated pretty quickly for artists is trying to account for inventory. If you're selling books or mugs or t-shirts, you're definitely going to have inventory. You'll declare it every year, carrying it over from the previous year onto line 35, and updating it at the end of the year on line 41. Whether or not your artwork itself counts as inventory might depend on any number of factors. So here's another situation where you would probably want to talk to a professional. Materials and supplies can go on line 38. These are the raw materials that you use to make the whatever it is that you're selling. Part 4 is the section where you document your mileage for business expenses. First thing you have to do is declare when you put the vehicle into service for business purposes. If you're using the car you've had for a while, then January 1st One of the things that's interesting about deducting your business mileage is that the IRS requires that you report your other mileage as well. So in line 44A, you're going to account for the mileage that you used dropping off work, driving to get supplies, or other trips where the primary purpose was directly related to your art career. But you also have to declare the amount of miles that you drove for commuting, Part B, and then you're going to subtract both those numbers from your total mileage for the year and report that amount in Part C, which means that you need to know your entire mileage for the year, which gives you something to look forward to on New Year's Day. Write down your mileage so that you have that number ready when you do taxes. Line 45 asks you whether or not you're using your car the rest of the time, and probably the answer is yes, unless you have a special vehicle just for art. Then it's going to ask if you have any other vehicles that you or your spouse can use. 47A is where they ask if you really mean it. Do you have evidence to support your deduction? And is the evidence written? You can satisfy this by keeping a mileage log, writing down the date and starting and stopping miles whenever you make an art trip. We are lucky enough to live in an age where you can use Google Maps to determine your precise mileage to and from the art supply store. And you've got written evidence that you went there because you have the receipt from the things that you bought. Documentation is fun. Part 5 is where you list other expenses, because the IRS knows that there's no way that it could account for all the different kinds of expenses that you would have by giving them their own line somewhere on this form. If you are paying fees for entering juried shows, that could go under other expenses. If you are paying for training to attend a workshop, that's a legitimate expense, and it might not fit neatly into one of the categories already on the form. Remember to keep documentation for every kind of expense that you have that is directly related to your art career. How do you want to save those? Physical receipts are great. Scanned copies work. Just make sure that it's still going to be accessible in the future. The IRS has roughly 7 years to decide that they want to audit you. The chances of getting audited are low, but you want to have the documentation. Having a big manila envelope where you shove all the receipts and save it for the next couple of years is probably a good idea. And again, hiring a CPA, a certified public accountant who's familiar with small business deductions, is probably going to save you money in the long run, and it would definitely help you sleep better at night.